Examples of word equations. On the slide, you will see the three general word equations which show the products formed when acids react. We have looked at the naming of salts, and I have mentioned that a salt has a quote-unquote first name and surname. Now, the acid forms part of the salt, and we've learned that there are certain names assigned to certain acids, and we're going to look at examples and see what this really means. But before we do, I just want to touch on the fact that the salt has a first name, right? So this first name, where does it come from? If we look at our three word equations, we're going to see that a metal reacts with an acid. There's also a metal carbonate, which will react with the acid. And another name for an alkali is a metal hydroxide. So can we see a pattern here? The pattern is that the other reactant contains a metal, and this metal becomes the first name of the salt. Before we proceed to look at examples of equations, I'm going to pause and remind you of some reactive metals, and you have to take note of it from the screen if you need to. Some reactive metals include sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, aluminum, zinc, and iron. So feel free to pause the video and take down this list of reactive metals. I'm going to continue by looking at an example of an equation between a metal and an acid, which forms a salt and hydrogen gas. If we start with magnesium and hydrochloric acid, the metal is magnesium. It becomes the first name of the salt, magnesium, and hydrochloric acid forms a chloride. So the name of the salt is magnesium chloride, and of course we get hydrogen gas. Another example, which is one which shows an acid reacting with a metal carbonate. If we have sulfuric acid and copper carbonate, the salt to be formed will be one in which the first name comes from the metal in metal carbonate, where that metal is copper, and the surname of the salt comes from sulfuric acid, where sulfuric acid forms a sulfate. So the salt to be formed is called copper sulfate, and the other two products include water and carbon dioxide. These are two simple examples which you're going to take down into your notebook, and we're going to go on to look at a few more. Here I have a table which shows the reactions between a metal and an acid, and this table is constructed in such a way that it's just meant to give you practice in naming of salts. Right, so we do know that hydrogen gas will be formed, but for now, what we want to be able to practice is the naming of the salt. So you're going to pause the video, take down the table from the screen. You are going to attempt the questions, and then you are going to replay the video or restart in order to see the answers. I'm going to go through the answers now. If magnesium reacts with hydrochloric acid, the salt to be formed is a chloride. Right, so hydrochloric acid forms a chloride. And the first name of the salt comes from the metal. So the name of the salt will be magnesium chloride. In the second question, and it's a trick one, if we have iron reacting with an acid where it forms iron nitrate, can you identify the acid which iron will react with? If you guess nitric acid, you were correct. Nitric acid forms a salt called a nitrate. In question 3, we have sodium ethanoate being formed. The ethanoate is derived from ethanoic acid. We see the metal in the name of the salt, and this is the answer. Where calcium reacts to form calcium sulfate, this means we can guess the acid, sorry, not guess, we can determine that the acid is sulfuric acid because the name of the salt is a sulfate. When copper reacts with sulfuric acid, the salt to be formed is a sulfate. The name of the metal is copper, so the name of the salt will be copper sulfate. Which metal does nitric acid react with to form iron nitrate? Is going to be iron. I'm going to fill in the answers for the rest, and you're going to correct your work to see if you got the correct answers. Once you have, this means that you are excellent at naming salts. Now that you've mastered looking at a metal and an acid to form a salt and hydrogen gas, here are some questions which you are going to do by writing out the products to be formed, and this practice is necessary in order to write word equations based on the reactants seen. So proficiency here is needed for later on if you choose to do the subject chemistry.